To defend democracy, we must defend Wall Street law firms? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is brought to you by, yes, the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. So if you want to learn how to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure while improving your pump at the gym, stick around. We'll talk about that later in today's episode. But first, in order to defend democracy, we must defend Wall Street law firms. That sounds a little goofball, and yet that is exactly the argument that some folks over in the capital region are making. Let's dig into that. Joining me here to discuss all that and more is Tom Blakely. Tom, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good, Brian. It's nice to be on. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show, Tom. I know we're looking forward to digging into all things Lawfare. We've seen that. That's been the name of the game here, and it's not new, right? It's one of those things. It has a lot of unfortunate historical precedents, but it's definitely rearing its ugly head today. But before we dig into that, let's do the audience a favor, Tom. Introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience and why you're focused on Lawfare and all that and more.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me on. My name is Tom Blakely. I'm an attorney. I split my time between Boston and Washington, D.C. I'm currently a federal judicial law clerk. Before that, I worked in big law and, kind of part of the setting that we're here to discuss today. Prior to that, I served in the United States Department of Justice. I worked in my state legislature and a number of other stops along the way. Before we get started, I just want to quickly note that my analysis is mine alone, does not reflect the views of the judiciary or my judge, and nothing that we're talking about is before my court or really ever could possibly be. So with that said, I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to chat with you, Brian.
There we go. We got the disclaimers out of the way. We're safe. All the legalese. Tom, I'm excited to have you on the show. Let's set the stage here. This has been an argument we've seen, especially, I'm going to just pick on the folks more on the political left, because this seems to be where it really is today. This idea of, well, we must defend democracy, therefore time to go to court. And that is where we've seen, back before the election, you had the targeting of Trump's lawyers, the targeting of Trump himself on many different issues, criminal cases, civil cases. But this isn't new, Tom. And that is something that I think a lot of folks, as they listen to today, they're going to maybe either have their eyes opened or they're going to say, yeah, that's right, I forgot about that. Because with our news nowadays, it seems to go a million miles a minute. So it's hard to keep up with all that's been happening. But before we dig into this, Tom, do us a favor, just kind of outline the crux of your article, which, by the way, was shared over on Counterpunch. I'll go ahead for the video watcher. You can go ahead and see that on your screen right about now. And if you're listening on the audio version of the show, head over to your favorite video show, Rumble, YouTube, whatever it is for watching the video content. We are live streaming this over on X. So if it's easier to go ahead and check it out there, you can check it out. But yeah, give us kind of the overview here, Tom. This whole to defend democracy, we must defend Wall Street law firms? ? What's the crux of your argument, or rather, I guess, your response to the argument being made?
Sure. Well, look, the question mark is important there, so I'm glad you had the inflection on the end, because that's kind of the framing of my piece. But so we're, I think, in July of the second term of Trump, there's been just so much news. It's hard to, kind of follow everything. But one of the threads that I found interesting was this story that was, I think now it seems like other things have, perhaps overshadowed it. But for a number of months this year, this story of lawfare between the Trump administration and some of these big law firms, Wall Street law firms, was a big deal. And I found the reaction to the news perhaps more interesting than the news itself. I mean, there's obviously plenty of opinions out there about the executive orders that Trump signed targeting these firms. I offer no opinion about the executive orders themselves. I mean, there's plenty of that out there that people can find. But what caught my eye is that as this lawfare was going back and forth, Trump was signing executive orders that did a number of things. One was trying to rescind security clearances of lawyers at these firms who had them. Barring some of these lawyers from federal buildings, rescinding funding that was going to public funding contracts, et cetera, to some of these firms, among some other measures that were there. I think in terms of like barring people from federal buildings, I mean, that's problematic as federal buildings, include courthouses. You're trying to tell lawyers they can't go to court. But then when you get into like security clearances, you might start to wonder why lawyers at firms that are representing like Wells Fargo have top secret security clearances. Like I feel like that's something that you want to know more about. So when you dig into this topic, you learn that there's really the key concept here is this idea of the revolving door, right? So the revolving door is the idea that in Washington, you have people who serve in high-level positions in the government. There's an election, things change hands, they go into cush, well-paid jobs in the private sector for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever it's going to be. And then they just turn around and go back into government when things change hands again. And the security clearance is something that you need for, most high-level government jobs. You need some kind of security clearance. And so this revolving door concept that's going on here, I found that fascinating. What I found even more fascinating than that are some of the reactions we saw to this story. So, you go on LinkedIn, you go on these, various websites where you see op-eds and so forth. And some of these people at these firms were writing these pieces that I was saying, I'm not going to name names, but you could see some of these pieces where it was like, never since the founding of democracy has ever, it's like, dude, you represent like Northrop Grumman. Like, what are you talking about? Like, which look, we believe that everyone's entitled to representation. We believe in capitalism. We believe in all these things. That's all fine. The problem, I think, becomes when there's just an obvious hypocrisy to the arguments that are being made, to the framing and the characterization that you're putting out there. Like, these Wall Street law firms are not like citadels of democracy. In fact, they're representing some of the most insidious corporations in the world, which again, it's fine. Everyone gets representation, it's all well and good. But I think it's problematic and it's very revealing about a lot of other serious issues that we have as a country when the same people who are, sort of part and parcel with this are then going out there with really not a ton of awareness and kind of making these arguments and reactions as if they themselves are not engaged in, I think, representing interests that are also deeply adverse to, the public interest of many Americans. And so I just think this reaction that we've seen to this issue is fascinating. And I think it reveals a lot about what's going on in the country.
So let's kind of just steel man for a moment the folks who are saying to defend democracy, we have to defend these Wall Street law firms. Because like in any world of sales, right, we want to make sure that we're almost steel manning the best value that your competition could present, but then differentiate. So like, let's actually give merit as much as we can to the arguments being made by these defenders. What does that look like? And I guess as you summarize this, give us the legalese, I guess, like where are they actually maybe making an argument and where are these arguments actually falling legally flat?
Sure. Well, it's a great point you brought up because I think it's important to distinguish something that's getting, I think, kind of merged together in a bit of an erroneous way with this issue, is that there's a distinction to be made between the people at the firms and the clients of the firms. The firms will tell you, and again, when we say firms, we're not talking about like, some kind of small town, we're with 3 lawyers and everybody kind of divides up the money at the end. We're talking about like massive corporations. They might be organized as partnerships, but for all intents and purposes, these are massive transnational organizations. And there's a distinction to be made here, as I was saying, between the clients of the firms and the attorneys of the firms, right? Like if there's this idea, the administration is trying to, cajole and strong arm these firms into not providing representation to a certain client or a certain class of clients. Well, that's, a problem on one hand. But separate from that, I think what we've seen with these executive orders is targeting some of the people at the firms and the work that they've done and some of the people that they've been affiliated with. You can think about like Fusion GPS, which is this opposition research firm that compiled the Steele dossier 2016, 2017. It was this dossier that was, in large part the basis of the Trump-Russia saga that, I think kind of played out over the last decade. And at this point, it's been more or less debunked. They were affiliated with the law firm Perkins Coie, which I don't know if I've ever heard a lawyer who knows how to pronounce the name of that firm. Everyone pronounces it differently for some reason. Kind of hard to say. But, that was the basis of the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation, in which there were many, false FISA, warrants on the basis of falsified affidavits. Like, that's a whole thing. Like, we're not just talking about like, hey, you can't represent Joe Schmo. We're talking about massive institutional Washington swamp politics here. So I think that's a distinction you want to make. And I think it's important to understand the role of politics in all this, because at the end of the day, this is a political story more than anything else. Another thing I want to throw in is it's important to note that lawfare is not new.
So when's the last time you really thought about your heart health? No, not after just a bad checkup or after seeing a loved one go through something scary, but really thought about it. And the reality is most people don't until it's too late. We chalk it up to fatigue, brain fog, or, just high blood pressure, or hey, maybe we're just getting older, or it's that dreaded stress. But the root cause might be something deeper. Your body's production of nitric oxide dropping off. That one molecule plays a critical role in keeping your arteries open, your blood pressure normal, and your cells oxygenated. And without enough of it, you're not performing at the best mentally or physically. And that's why I've been taking Cardio Miracle for 2 years now. It's a nitric oxide powerhouse packed with over 50 ingredients like organic beetroot, L-arginine, CoQ10, vitamin D3 that are all clinically proven to help support circulation, reduce inflammation, and supercharge your energy levels. It's not just heart support, it's whole body support. So if you're tired of feeling off, give your heart and your health the boost it needs. Just click the link in the show notes or scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS to start your journey today. Discount already applied. Just look for the note, "You're shopping with Brian Nichols" at checkout. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
A lot of people with respect to this issue want to pretend like the history of it began 3 months ago. And it's just obviously not the case. If anyone who studied the history of these firms, or sort of the history of lawfare on this issue, knows this has been going on forever. You can go back to the 1990s with Bill Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky scandal. You had Ken Starr, the special counsel in that case, came from the law firm Kirkland Ellis. I believe may have brought more junior people with them who were staffers in that investigation. You can go back to Sullivan and Cromwell was representing Nazi war industries and around World War II. In the 1880s, you had law firms representing the big trusts of the day, Standard Oil, et cetera, trying to fight against trust busting. These were organizations that were engaged in some of the most egregious labor, abuses ever, inventing these weird corporate forms and legal fictions to try to throw. This stuff's been going on forever. And there's also the idea of the revolving door that I mentioned earlier. That's always been present in Washington, where there's this relationship, which is oftentimes a bit nefarious, between power and the public interest, and then sort of this private sector, concentration of organized money. And so this relationship and dynamic has sort of always been there. I think only lately, do we have an administration that's more directly, seeking to go into conflict with the firms.
Interesting. So, this goes to where we heard a lot of the rhetoric back during the campaign rear its ugly head. And I mentioned, beforehand, how we saw a lot of lawfare being used actually against Trump. So it almost feels that in this case, where Trump is using these executive orders to directly target some of these law firms, it does feel like you punch first, I'm going to punch back. But it's not a matter of, I guess, really who punched first. It's who punched most recent harder. And it's back and forth. So what does this look like if it continues forward? Is there an end conclusion, or is this one of those things it just keeps snowballing and snowballing and snowballing? Meanwhile, your average person just kind of sits there and is like, hey, remember East Palestine, Ohio? We had a train derailment and it dumped oodles of chemicals into our water. Or, hey, we're down in Asheville, North Carolina. Remember that hurricane that hit us back, a year ago, and it took out all of our infrastructure? Help. Or the Palisades fire, where an entire neighborhood, multiple homes, millions and millions of dollars of homes burned to the ground. What's happening in Texas with the flash flooding from the Guadalupe River? We see all these things that are impacting your average everyday people, and yet these don't seem to get the headlines, Tom, that the lawfare does, right? We think of the court cases; they were leading the headlines throughout the election. They continue to lead headlines today in response to Trump's reaction. So, there very much is this discrepancy between what the big corporate news agencies focus on and, frankly, what the average person really cares about.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm so glad you brought those things up. I mean, there's a lot of great points in there. Those are some things that I wanted to get to. In fact, I mean, I think first off, I think this kind of underscores the absurdity of some of the reaction I've seen. I mean, look, put all of this aside. If the administration's targeting the firms will sue. I mean, that's their right to do that. I mean, this is a business issue at the end of the day. I think separate and apart from these levers that the administration is trying to pull to target the firms, I think the biggest thing here that the firms are worried about is the stigma of being associated with being on the outs in Washington, right? Like the way that these firms make their money increasingly in today's day and age is doing through, massive corporate transactions, private equity financing, things like that. A lot of these deals are subject to government review, right? Through the FTC, if it's a merger, things like that. So if you're a big business or you're a bank and you have a very wide array of legal counsel you could choose from among these firms, you're not going to go with a firm that's like on the outs with Washington. You need someone who can help grease the skids. And so you can understand why they're going to sue and they're going to try to, make cut deals and do things to, effectuate their economic self-interest. Putting that aside to the thing you're getting to, the sort of cultural, moral reaction that we're seeing when you're seeing these LinkedIn posts and these op-eds and these media hits from people at these firms that I think reflect a significant amount of hypocrisy, which you just laid out, right? I mean, when you look at America and you look at, East Palestine, Ohio, you look at what's going on in California and Texas. I mean, look at the fact that almost 40% of Americans do not have $400 in an emergency, right? Like the people at these firms, like an entry-level associate at a big law firm that's, on what's called the crusade scale, which is like the main big law salary scale. Like a 25-year-old straight through school is making $225,000 as a first-year associate. The people at these firms have levels of privilege that 99% of Americans can only dream about at night, right? So it's like you take that on the one hand, and then you look at the way that most of the country is living their lives and the challenges that people are dealing with. Like, you look at anybody who's been around court or been around law enough. You have people in this country going into like federal bankruptcy court and like losing their house so that they can afford a hip surgery. Like the issues most people are worried about. And then you have these people, these firms, you go to like Northern Virginia, you go to like McLean, Virginia, outside of DC, you're like $7 million mansions where the partners in a lot of these firms live. It's an entirely different universe. It's an entirely different reality. So you open the newspaper and it's like, never since the framers, created whatever the, kind of maximalist framing of this is going to be, where these people are, playing the victim of this failing of democracy. And then you look at the flip side of it, which is that these firms are representing private equity firms, investment banks, transnational corporate, people who are polluting the air and the water, people who are engaged in all kinds of financial schemes, junk fees, big tech, algorithmic. I mean, we could do 10 shows on all of the business strategies that a lot of the clients of these firms are in. So to then turn around and come out with these like crazy, I think, framings of this stuff with no humility, I think for the significant amount of, privilege that the people of these firms enjoy, which in large part is on the backs of people in the places that you mentioned who, you go to East Palestine, Ohio, you go to West Virginia, you go to a lot of these places, in the country that, I at one point have traveled to, and you see the poor and the working poor and the people who, their industries have been sent overseas. They're, everybody's, overweight and they're living in food deserts. It's like, is the threat to democracy really this stuff, or is a lot of the threat coming from the clients of these places? And of course, that's not what the administration was targeting here, but I think it's an important subtext to what's going on. And I'll quit yapping here, but I think really what it brings us to is the class conflict that's going on right now in the United States.
Well, and by the way, I mean, elephant in the room for a contemporary topic. We're seeing right now as we're recording this whole behind the scenes thing with the administration's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case. And I think the real sentiment from more of the populist right, and frankly, it's not even a political thing like a right-left thing. This is just across the board. It is this political class relative to your average, everyday, normal person. And your average, everyday, normal person looks at this Jeffrey Epstein case and not only sees the political class almost like bending the rules, if not outright breaking rules in order to protect folks in the upper levels of that political class, but then there's, to your point, the hypocrisy of the average everyday person saying, listen, if this was me or my neighbor that got caught like a Jeffrey Epstein, or were on the so-called list that doesn't exist, but we all know actually does exist, right? Like if that was me or my neighbors or somebody in like my community, you're darn right we would have gotten in trouble. We got in big trouble, right? And to see that discrepancy, there are so many people now who are getting disaffected with not just the current political system, but Tom, like they're ready for a brand new system. Like so many folks are just looking at where we are right now, and they think we are irrevocably broken. Like there is nothing we can do to actually make things better. It's, you know, we see right now Dan Bongino potentially talking about stepping down. Like, I mean, if that happens, I think it was Jesse Kelly on his show. He's like, if that happens, I know that it can't be fixed, right? And that's a terrifying thought to even like consider, because if we're at a point where we can no longer like fix things, be that from the political process, the legal process, or something therein, that leaves only a few options on the table, and those options aren't good, right? Like that's some 1776 stuff. So with that in mind, I think there's also this overarching issue that we as a society, as a country, need to address, and that is this discrepancy between that political elite ruling class and the set of rules that we'll proudly put somebody in jail and say because nobody's above the law, and then have these one-off use cases where it's like well. Maybe some people are above the law, because if we actually held these people, their feet to the fire, well, these are very important people. It could destroy politicians. It could destroy companies. It could destroy countries, right? And that turns into your average person saying, "So what? So what? If it was me and it was my business and I got caught doing something like this, you don't think that my business would crash and burn because all of a sudden I'm in jail? Yeah, because I got caught doing something wrong. In this case, like explicitly illegal. Come on here. Like that. I think that's where your average person's like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care anymore. Like, so what? Let's burn it all to the ground. And that's a scary place to be in.
Yeah, no, I think you make a lot of good points. I think as far as the Epstein thing goes, I think it's sort of a exhibit A of why the large parts of the public feel the way that they do. I mean, not just the populist right, or and I think it's interesting with like that stuff, because people like to talk about the left and right, but I think really where we're getting to is it's more like elites and populists are kind of the more acute paradigm that we're dealing with now. But you're right. Like a lot of people look at, and I'm not an expert on what's happened with Epstein, but I think you kind of have to live under a rock to not have heard about what's going on there. I think a lot of people look at that and they send I think the reporting that's happened there, at least that I've seen, it would make a lot of people think like, okay, there are a lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of power who, as you said, there's not accountability there. In fact, a lot of these systems that are designed to create accountability and transparency are not doing that. And I think really what this gets to, as much as anything else, is, I don't know if you follow the journalist Matt Taibbi. He had this great piece. I feel like it was a few years ago, where he called or framed, sort of Trump's continued viability and success as an insult to aristocratic America. And I think that describes it so well. I mean, you think about everything that happened in his first term and everything that happened, in sort of that interregnum period, everything, just the oceans of ink that have been spilled out, screaming from the rooftops, all the things that this guy is. And then he wins again by more than he did the first time. So I think,
and is popular, like post-election, is still maintaining that popularity.
Right. So I think what that has done, like when these people, like there's this phrase that we've heard a lot in the last 10 years, this phrase, what Trump represents. Everyone's like, what Trump represents might represent different things to different people, right? And I think, just at least personally, people say like what Trump represents, like, I don't think they're talking about like Stormy Daniels, right? Like if the New York prosecutors were serious about putting everyone in jail that did that kind of thing, half of New York City would be in prison, right? Like what we're really talking about, or I think these people are talking about.
If you're a small business owner and your phone contract is coming up for renewal, ask your provider if you can just go month to month. Watch what happens. They'll stammer, they'll delay, or straight up dodge the question. Why? Because they don't want to earn your business. They want to lock it up. And that's why I'm such a fan of Level 365. They don't play the contract game. Everything's month to month. No tricks, no traps. If they're not delivering, you can walk. But here's the kicker.
You won't want to. Phones that actually serve you, not hold you hostage. That's level 365.
What Trump represents is something that's a little bit more deep and complicated, which I think Trump represents the displacement of establishment power. It represents, a critical mass of American voters saying, you know what, we're so sick of establishment retail politics. We're going to chuck this grenade into the machine that is Trump. And
this is what Glenn Beck was talking about. Like, he is the big proverbial middle finger to the entire political system. They're like, oh, you think that we are, and I'm saying we, the populist, we are these gross, slobby, people who can't talk right? Like, and we're not educated enough. Fine. We're going to elect the guy you guys hate. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so I think the way that dovetails into, big law, into the reaction that we're seeing with this story is that if you think about who's in, like, big law firms, it is the American establishment. It is sort of the aristocracy, if you will. And I think when you look at these people, like, they don't just dislike Trump, like, they hate this guy, right? And I think the reason that they feel that way, and the reason that they do, we talked about the revolving door earlier, that elite power structure where you have big law firms, you have high levels of government, people are going back and forth. When people talk about this phrase "drain the swamp," again, that's something that people can be referring to different things. But I think one thing most people would be referring to is this idea that there's this perverse relationship between organized money and power that's adverse to the interests of the American people. So when Trump comes in and he's appointing people he knows off of Fox News, he's taking people from channels other than the ones that have sort of historically been used, where you go through this revolving door, it kind of obviates and displaces that power structure. And these people don't like that, right? Like, I remember, to give you a quick story, last September, I was at the Google antitrust trial in the Eastern District of Virginia, U.S. versus Google. They lost that case, earlier this year. But I'm sitting there in the courtroom, and Google's top lawyer is this woman named Karen Dunn, who at the time was at Paul Weiss, which is one of the big firms that was, a target of the executive orders. Very early in the case, this was just on the threshold of that debate between Kamala Harris and President Trump. She gets up there in the morning, says what she has to say, and the judge says, okay, if you need to go, and there's no recording of this because there's no electronics allowed in the courtroom, which is kind of another debate we can have. But the judge says, okay, if you need to go, you can go. And I'm kind of like, well, where is she going? Like, the trial day is just beginning. She had to go prepare Kamala Harris for the debate because she's, prepares Democrat. Like, that's, one of the things that she does. And if you think about it, so she's representing Google, which is a defendant in a case being prosecuted by the government whose vice president is Kamala Harris. Like, this is an irreconcilable conflict of interest. There's a lot of reporting that had Kamala Harris won. Karen Dunn was going to be the White House counsel. That was nice. So it's like, you can look at this revolving door structure that's there. Now, obviously, that's not what ended up happening. So I think that there's another funny aside to this where, I think Paul Weiss, was one of these firms that, eventually came to some kind of deal with Trump. A lot of those firms, they'll say, oh, well, you're capitulating to Trump. And Karen Dunn actually left with a few other lawyers and started this new firm. And I remember seeing some of this reporting or some of these posts that said, oh, see, she's leaving because, she didn't like that, how they capitulated to Trump. And then it came out that she was like in favor of the deal with the White House. So it's like, these people are very transactional. And I think that at the end of the day, to what you're talking about, the public has kind of caught on to the game at this point. The public kind of understands, okay, there's a perverse relationship here between money and power. And, we're going to throw you Trump. We're going to give you Mandami. We're going to give you, we'll see what happens in 2028. But things are changing right now. And I think people at big law firms are definitely of that kind of permanent establishment class where they're going between big law representing corporations, going into the administration to sort of be in charge of regulating the same companies that were just paying them a lot of money. Like, Trump, to some extent, represents the displacement of that power structure. And I think that is what these people have the strongest reaction to, as much as anything else.
Well, and by the way, and I think it's important for us just to make sure this is crystal clear. This is not just a one-sided thing. This is across the board. I mean, I love him, but I think I'm gonna say his name wrong. Ajit Pai, I think is how you said his name.
Yes.
Yeah, former FCC head, right? And now he is leading an org who is trying to lobby the FCC. And it's that stuff. Like, I get it. I get it.
Like neutrality guy, right? Who was like really killed that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like, and trust me, like I get the value that he's doing in trying to help push the FCC towards a better direction. But when folks see that revolving door, I just listened to a podcast over on Patrick Bet David. He sat down with the CI whistleblower, John Kirikow, I believe is how you say his name.
Former CIA guy, yeah.
And what an eye-opening episode, right? Because you sit down and listen, and not only are you hearing the how the sausage is made, but you get to see from a CIA whistleblower's perspective that revolving door. And he's talking about like John Brennan, for example. John Brennan wasn't really, in with the bigwigs over at the CIA. Obama gets elected. Suddenly here he goes from being, on the outs to now he's leading the CIA and using the CIA's weapons, or in this case, the power the CIA has against average, everyday, normal folks, in which the spotlight got turned on John, and he tells that story. But like, this is the part where your average person, again, going back to that average person, because that at the end of the day, I think is what really matters here, Tom, as we're going towards the tail end of the conversation, is that the administration, and not just the across the board, the administrations, right? The political elite, call them what you will, if they don't wake up to the reality, the working class, the populist class, the average everyday person that we've been talking about, they will start to fight back. They've been fighting back, trying to do so through the voting booth. But what happens when that no longer has any impact, right? And that's where I get really nervous, because I think Tim Pool actually talked about this before, where you go from everything's fine, everybody's just living their life, and then all of a sudden things happen immediately. And we have this Hollywoodification of how things happen. Like, if we're going towards a civil war or something in that world, like we're expecting, okay, you're starting to see the states break apart, and you're starting to see the militaries get built up. It's like, no, it goes from like, it's a Saturday and it's a beautiful Saturday, and then all of a sudden it's like tomorrow there's helicopters flying over your community. It goes from 0 to 100 in an instant. So the fact that so many people are kind of just on cruise control, but more and more folks are waking up, I'm not saying that I'm going to completely discount that as being something that could happen. I think, as more and more people get frustrated with the political system, they're seeing, the corruption, they're seeing the cover-ups, they're seeing the some folks who have political clout or power being favored politically, legally speaking, versus the average person. That creates this class of the elites versus the average folk. And there is going to be pushback. There already is being pushback. So, I don't want to paint a picture of being negative. We're always trying to focus on the positive here in the show, but it is something we need to be aware of. If we continue down this path where lawfare is what we're focusing more on versus actually solving real people's issues, your average person is going to say, okay, well then who do I turn to? What do I turn to? And that's where we start to get some very uncomfortable questions being asked. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you bring us home here, Tom. Final thoughts for today. What would you like folks to take away from today's episode?
Yeah, well, look, I think, I have a thought, but just to, respond to what you just said. I mean, look, I think we are sort of standing in this hinge of history right now. This does feel like a pivotal time where we're sort of waiting to see where things go. I do think a lot of people feel the way that you do. And I think only lately where, you have like some of the podcasts that you've mentioned where there's this sort of, disintermediation of media, where a lot of these more sort of populist, voices and skepticism. I mean, just to kind of weave a common thread through some of the things you mentioned, whether that's like, Epstein, or it's like, Biden's health, or like, COVID origins, or Russia, like some of these things where, now you look back and you see, a lot of what we were told wasn't exactly true. And you look at people observing their own economic condition and their own economic self-interest, that, people can't buy a home, and so there's a lot of skepticism that is being, trained on the people who we vote into office to fix some of these problems, right? So I think you're absolutely right. As far as this goes, to bring us home, I think the biggest story here, and look, like I said, I offer no opinion on the executive orders themselves. I mean, the firms have filed suit. That's going to play out. It is what it is. What's most interesting to me is kind of the cultural media reaction to this stuff that we've seen. And I think the biggest thing here is that this is another frontier in the culture war, right? Like, this is people in big law. Like, these are, the elites, right? These are elite law firms, people who went to elite law schools. people who have very tight relationships, obviously, with, very large corporations. We've talked about the revolving door and sort of that, nexus of power and that sort of relationship among power structures. With Trump's continued viability and success, we'll see where things go in, 2028. If, we get presumably, JD Vance as a candidate, I guess you'd have to see who the Democrats come out with. If things continue to go in this more populist direction that is very skeptical of some of the power structures that, that we've mentioned, I think this is going to continue to be an issue. I think the reaction to the Lawfare story really underscores a lot of what's going on under the surface, in the country right now, which is that there is this sort of broad-based skepticism of this kind of power. There are people who have a lot of power who do not want to lose it, who do not like populism, who do not like, people like Trump displacing those power structures. So it's just another front in the culture war. It's just further, I think, indicia of this class conflict that's going on. And we'll see where it goes. But I think it's an interesting thread that I think reveals a lot about, some of the issues that we have as a country.
Yeah, no, I can't agree more. And I guess with that being said, we are unfortunately getting ready to say goodbye. So, Tom, I want folks to be able to make sure they can reach out and continue this conversation if they would like to do so. So hit us with the social media links. Where can folks go ahead, reach out, tell you all the things you got right, things I got wrong, and more on today's show?
Of course. Well, I would say I'm most active on LinkedIn. That's where I post all my stories. I also post them on Twitter as well. My handle on both places is just my name. So you can just search me on there and I come up. I don't think there's a million people with the same name as me. So you can find me on there. I post everything there. I tend to write a lot primarily on, legal and, public policy topics. So I had a story just came out about the Karen Reed murder case, which was a big story in, the Northeast, but I guess it's kind of since become a national story. And I've got some more pieces coming out on, topics like this. And, I think my obviously my day job is I'm a lawyer, but, I think my legal interest is sort of on this intersection that we've talked about, the intersection of, power, policy, regulation, and all of this stuff. And I think this is a very interesting time to write about it. So if you want to read more, you can hit me up there. I'm always happy to talk to folks and come on podcasts. And and this has been great. It was great to, be on. It was great to chat it up about this.
For sure, man. Hey, I appreciate you coming on the show. And folks, I appreciate you spending some time with us today to learn more about, to defend democracy, we must defend Wall Street law firms? Question mark. I got to make sure I have the upward inflection there, Tom, so folks get the point. But folks, if you got some value from today's show, please go ahead and give it a share. When you do, you can also tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty on Facebook, on X, and over on Instagram. Also, if you want to go ahead and subscribe to the Brian Nichols Show, head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you subscribe to podcasts, or head to your favorite video platforms like YouTube, Rumble. We are uploading the show over on Facebook and X as well, which, by the way, we do our live streams Monday, Thursday, and Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you hit that little subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss a single time we go live. By the way, yes, if you want to go ahead and support the Brian Nichols Show, you can support us by supporting our phenomenal sponsors like Cardio Miracle, Ebel CBD, Liquid Freedom Energy Tea, Blood of Tyrants Wine, and more. If you are watching the show, you can scan those little QR codes over my shoulder. They'll bring you right to those sponsor websites with the discount links applied. If for whatever reason it doesn't, though, just use code TBNS at checkout and you will get some discount there. 15% here, 20% there, maybe a free shipping. Who knows? You'll get a nice little surprise. But with that being said, folks, thank you for joining us. Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Tom Blakely. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.